There are many odd stories in the Bible, just in case you had never known that. And the one we're going to hear today is a combination of odd, weird, challenging, strange, and probably a whole lot of other adjectives as well. It is the appointed lesson from the Gospel for today, and it comes from the Gospel of Mark, the 5th chapter. It comes from a story, it is a story about Jesus getting out of his comfort zone and for the first time crossing the Sea of Galilee, leaving behind his hometown of Nazareth, leaving behind his home region of Galilee, and going across the Sea of Galilee into an area called the Decapolis, at least at the time. Decapolis meaning simply 10 cities. It was a Roman area, and the 10 cities were big Roman cities filled with amphitheaters and marble temples and swimming pools, neptunariums, filled with big houses and marbled streets, at least for the upper 5% of the population. And that's where Jesus goes. Out of his own culture, out of his own religion, out of his own hometown, and into the shadow of the Roman Empire. And that's where this story takes place. And so let our hearts and our lives be open to the reading, hearing, and understanding of this ancient story, that it might offer us new life, and through us we might be compelled to offer new life and hope to others.
A story of new life from the 5th chapter of the Gospel of Mark. Jesus and the disciples came to the other side of the lake, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. This man lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains. But the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke into pieces. And no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, by God, do not torment me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legiones, for ye are many." He begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now there on the hillside a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirit begged him, "Send us to the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank of the lake and were drowned in the lake. The swineherds ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came out to see what is it that had happened. Then they came to Jesus and saw the man sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. As he was getting into the boat, The man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus has done for him, and everyone was amazed. Word of God, word of life.
One of the many things I've learned from Brad Ellingbo over the last 10 years, among many, many things, is that sometimes when he's teaching a new anthem to the choir, he doesn't start at the beginning. He starts at the end and works his way back with all of you, right? Which I think is a wonderful idea because it lets you know what you're heading for, what the real goal is of what you're singing. And so today I'd like to invite us, at least briefly, to start with the end of the story we've just heard. Because this story is so complex and just downright weird in places, by the time we get to that very end, the last paragraph of this story, we may just sort of brush it off. It's no big deal. But I'd like to put forward to you today that at least to a certain degree, it is a story, it is the end that is the most challenging of this story. And in a story that has parts of it talking about legions of demons and someone howling like a banshee in the hills, and Jesus telling the spirits to go into the pigs, and the pig is rushing off the cliff, and all of those things. I think the very last sentence of this story is the one that, at least for a congregation like the United Church of Santa Fe, us good, mainline, rational, everybody has a right to their own belief kind of story, kind of Christians. I think it's that last line that's going to scare the bejesus out of us. The line where the man is so thankful for being healed. He goes and he tells everybody he knows what Jesus had done for him. And if that doesn't strike terror in our good, mainline, moderate to liberal hearts, I don't know what will. Because you see, we're quiet Christians. We don't want to put our faith on our sleeve. We don't want to impose it on anybody. And so therefore, thunderous voices that will tell us what Christianity is all about will always, as they have for the last umpteen number of years, get the last word. It's good to begin at the end of something. You learn something in a new way, right? So I'd like to just put that out there for you to consider as we consider the rest of this story. And this is one of those stories that a preacher could enter into in just a whole variety of ways. But I know that we have to, you guys, some of you are waiting for brunch. Some of you are waiting for Cheryl's presentation. Some of you have small children that are going to get antsy. Some of you have spouses that are going to get antsy. That we're not going to go down all of those rabbit holes. But there are a lot of them in this story. I already mentioned one of them in the introduction, that here is this story. It's a story about Jesus getting out of his own comfort zone and going to a place where they don't speak his language, they don't pray to the same God, and they are under the shadow, complete shadow of the Roman Empire. And yet he's willing to get out of the boat and do what he's called to do. Now that could be a real challenge for a church turning 45 and what the future might bring us in terms of how we get out of our own comfort zones to become the people God calls us to be. So that's one sermon. Another sermon is that this poor man, that he apparently has some kind of demon, which, as you've heard me say multiple times before, is simply a first century way of talking about somebody who has some kind of either neurological issue or some kind of mental health issue. It is not demon possession. And also that in the 4 Gospels, there are more stories about Jesus healing someone who has a demon, an unclean spirit, all different kinds of bad spirits, evil spirits, etc., etc. There are more stories about Jesus healing people who are afflicted with some kind of mental, emotional, perhaps spiritual, neurological issue than all the other healing stories combined. Sometime sit down with all 4 Gospels, read through them, keep tally of how many people are healed of that kind of, or need of that kind of healing, versus those who are lame or blind or deaf or had leprosy. And you put all of those other ones together, and they don't even come close to how many times Jesus heals somebody in mental distress. And a preacher could get a whole sermon out of that in terms of what does that say about what the Christian church needs to be about in this world. And then there's this thing about, what is your name? Jesus says to the man or to the spirit. The text is really uncertain. And the spirit says, the man says, my name is Legion. Now, some translations simply translate that as, my name is a lot of folks. My name is a lot. You've got to use the word legion in this story, because the Gospel of Mark was written in a time when the Roman legion had marched into Israel, Palestine, and tore down the temple, set flames to Jerusalem, then went north and did the same thing in Nazareth, Galilee area. I've seen the ruins of a synagogue that the Roman legion besieged in the very first century. And so if you have a story has a new Christian understanding in which you call the demons possessing this poor man the legion, you're being pretty subversive in terms of your relationship with the empire of the legion. You can get a whole sermon out of that one. What does it say to have Jesus taking on the legion in this story? What does it say about the gospel, the people of the 70s AD or so, talking about a legion of demons when they're living in the midst of what the Roman legion has done? You could also talk about the pigs and the environmental disaster that comes when you have 2,000 pigs, demon-infested pigs, thrown into a lake. Let's not talk about the pigs. I'll leave that for a guest preacher. What I want to talk about, most of all, is the question that the man asks Jesus. What have you to do with me, Jesus, child of the Most High, chosen one, Rabbi? What have you to do with us? Cries the man who is living in the tombs. And the mere fact that he's living in the tombs outside the city puts that question as a logical one. Because he was living with whatever it was that he was dealing with outside the great city of Gadara, a great Roman city. I've had the opportunity to go to the ruins of Gadara. In 2017, I was traveling and studying in Jordan for just a couple weeks. And I went up to the northwestern corner of modern-day Jordan, and that's where the ruins of Gadara are. All that marble, all those wonderful temples, the Neptunarium, the paved marble road. All that's left are the about half walls of the temple, some torn down marble, some pillars marking the main road, and pieces of the Neptunarium. But in Jesus' time, that was a great marble Roman city, filled with wealth inside the city, filled with wealth for the maybe 5, maybe 10% of the people who lived in that part of the city, the center of the city, where the temples and the swimming pools and the stadiums and the amphitheaters all were. And yet that great, powerful, rich city did not have room for a man like the one we meet in this story. He's living in the tombs, my friends, because he has no other place to live. No shelters, no pallet houses, no permanent housing, permanent supportive housing. And his family had no clinics to which he could go during the day to be cared for. That wasn't even on the Roman Empire's radar, if the Roman Empire had had radar. But you get my point. This wealthy, marbled, incredible city had no room for someone like that man, and I guarantee you for someone like his family. And so the man justifiably said to this Jesus, look at where my home city doesn't have any room for me, has nothing to do with me. What have you to do with me, Jesus, Most High, Son of the living God? And what Jesus had to do with him 2,000 years ago was to offer healing, to offer care, to offer mercy, not to push him away, not to confine him back to the tombs, but somehow, maybe in the way Mark described it, maybe in other ways, he showed this person that he was a beloved child of a loving God. That's what Jesus Christ had to do with the man living in the tombs. Not with fear, not with shaming, but with love and care, with compassion. That's what he had to do with that man. What have you to do with us? Cried the man. And Jesus' response in his words and in his deeds was to say, everything. Everything. And my friends, 2,000 years later, for those of us who gather for worship in a united church of Christ, for those of us who are trying to follow in the ways of Jesus Christ, for those of us who might claim the name of Christian, even if we don't tell anybody, that's the question that our world asks us. The ones who are living on the margins. What have you to do with us? It's the question for our time, this time, as much as it was a question 2,000 years ago in that wealthy Roman imperial city of Gadara. What have you to do with us? Jesus said everything. And that needs to be our answer as well. Thanks be to God. Amen.